Welcome back to yet another episode of the Kitabi Karwan podcast. Today, I have someone with me who is a clash of two of my favorite worlds, Bollywood and books. I have with me Anupama Chopra, the editor and founder of Film Companion, a renowned film critic and someone who's been doing this for almost 30 years and slightly over, I guess. Anupama is an industry leading critic whose work has been appreciated by everyone who reads her or watches her on television. With deep insight into how the industry works, Anupama's new book, A Place in My Heart, is an interesting one because it captures 51 unique stories, if I may, from ranging from films to actors to actresses and producers, and just the ways in which she fell in love with this industry. Without giving much away, let's jump right to the interview. Welcome, Anupama, to Kitabi Karwan. I'm so glad to have you here. And it's sort of a dream come true because I'm a huge Bollywood buff and a bibliophile. So this is just two of my worlds colliding perfectly in that manner whatsoever. So without wasting any time, let me just jump to the first question right away. Um, so this is something that holds true for most authors, and I think in your case it goes beyond just being authors because you're a public personality yourself with your work involving journalism. I think today most authors and writers have a more public persona than anything else because of social media and how things are, right?
Yeah.
But due to various reasons, whether it's privacy or just how you're guarded your personality is, people keep a certain side of them hidden away, and rightly so, as they are very well within their rights to do so. But would you just like to share a part of you which probably we might not know about you just by googling you or by reading the blurb at the back of your book, some I don't know, maybe something related to your side of writing, or maybe anything about you that you think would help our listeners know you a bit better.
Oh wow, that's a good one. But I'm trying to think, Siddharth, what they don't know, and I feel like in the age of social media, uh, there isn't because I'm a fairly transparent person.
Yeah.
Of course, not my whole life isn't on social media, but I don't know if there's any interesting fact that because it's so funny that I've even referred so often to my food. I have several food intolerances, and I have
Mhm.
to be gluten free. I have to be dairy free. And the other day, I posted a picture where I said I was drinking hot chocolate, and somebody even commented about, "Oh, I thought you were vegan, and are you having? Is this your cheat day?" And I was like, "Wow, people are even." I thought that's so funny. Like,
Right.
why does anybody care if I'm having a cheat day or if I'm having a little milk? It was just hilarious. But
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. Maybe just that I'm a really early riser.
Okay.
So I'm up every morning at 5:30, and that's where I get my best work done.
Right.
And I'm one of those really boring people who is basically in bed at 10. If if it gets to like 10, 15, 10:30, then I'm starting to not make sense. I'm starting to get really cranky. So
Right.
it's very, very funny.
Right.
I need to be kind of winding down from life and into bed at about 10, 10, 15 max.
Right. Wait, so I'm curious, you've never done that 9 se 12 wala show?
I try when I have to, I will.
Right.
But I try and avoid it, honestly, Siddharth, because
Ah.
especially for reviewing, because
Mhm.
I just feel like I'm not my best at my
Right.
best self. And if I have to do that, then I try and take a nap in the afternoon because, when you wake up at 5:30, you aren't really making a lot of sense at 10 o'clock.
Understandable. Well, that's first of all, I think my parent listeners would really want their children to hear this, and the vice versa. They wouldn't really ever want successful people telling their parents that they're sleeping at 10 and waking up at 5:30 in the morning. But Anupma, I'm always been very curious about this, right? I've read a bit about you and I've watched a lot of your interviews. Uh, how was this Bollywood kida born in you that kind of drove you towards journalism? I mean, you write a bit about this in your book as well, about how you're grateful that your parents didn't really bother you about the pressures of this job and they were quite supportive. But
Yeah.
what actually, I mean, it's great that you're doing this. I absolutely love your work, but it's very difficult for me to imagine, back like even now for someone
Yeah,
to kind
yeah,
of
yeah.
just like even take up film journalism and head right first into it without any major connections in the industry, or for that matter,
Yeah.
anything to that. So how did these two worlds collide? Like, where did you write about Sholay, and being that 8-year-old who watched Sholay, and I can't imagine how that would have felt. But I can see where that filmy kida comes. But how did this
No,
life
but
translate?
actually, so that it wasn't so much that I grew up watching films and I fell in love with films. It wasn't that at all.
Mm-hmm.
It was completely accidental.
Mm-hmm.
I graduated from St. Xavier's College in Mumbai, and I'm an English literature major. And at that time, there wasn't much. There weren't too many choices. You went into advertising, which was the hipper, cooler sort of job to do,
Mm-hmm.
or you taught.
Mm-hmm.
There really weren't many options for English lit majors. And it was still a time when, of course, women were in the workforce, but it would have been just as well for me to get married. And, I mean, that would have been seen as, okay, well, fine. I mean, we weren't driven to work in the way that I think women now, and I don't mean driven in a negative way. I mean, you want to, you are ambitious, you want to achieve,
Right.
you want to work. Marriage is not the sort of be all and end all of your existence. But when I was growing up, while it wasn't the be all and end all, it was still considered a very, very good
Right.
option.
Right. Right.
Um, but when I graduated, one of my professors suggested that I just work at Movie Magazine as a lark, really as a
Right.
temporary stopgap while I figure out what I really want to do. And it was that temporary job that turned into a lifelong passion.
Wow. It just makes me think so much about these accidental opportunities that come your way. You really never know what's
Absolutely.
shaping your life. Right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. It was not at all a thought out. What was thought out was once I knew that I've fallen in love. Then I
Mm-hmm.
said that, I can't just be a journalist. I have to
Right.
train. So
Right.
then I went to Northwestern University. I got a master's in journalism. I worked in New York for a year at Harper's Bazaar magazine.
Mm-hmm.
And then I came back because I knew I was never going to live in America. I was
Mm-hmm.
always going to come back because the only thing I wanted to write about was Hindi cinema.
No, so Anupa, I'll just come back to the book that you've written, A Place in My Heart. It's a beautiful read, and I would love all of my readers to read it. But I have a very very simple question. So generally, when you pick up a book and this is a fiction book, this is a short story, this is something or the other, I was kind of stumped when it came to classifying your book. The closest I could come was say a memoir, but it wasn't necessarily one.
It's not.
Right. So how would you describe this book, and what kind of when you were writing the acknowledgements, you did put up that's not a result of the pandemic, and just before it you came
Yeah.
up with the title, but what prompted this book? I mean, it's a beautiful one. I mean, I discovered some new things and rediscovered some of the older things that I loved about the movies that you mentioned. But where would you put this book, and where did it come from?
So it's really kind of I don't know, it's a listicle book, isn't it? If
Yeah.
there is such a thing.
Has to
you
be in the
know,
age of BuzzFeed. There has to be something called a
there has
listicle
to
book
be a
out there.
listicle book. Correct. So that's essentially what it is. And really it came out of um, my longing to write again. And of course, I write all the time. I mean, I'm writing all my reviews. I write out properly, like my reviews, before I shoot them for video. But it was really a longing to sort of slightly go deeper. Because book writing is a very different muscle, and it's a muscle that I have not exercised in a very long time. Because the last book I wrote was I want to say Shahrukh, the Shah Rukh Khan in the Seductive World of Indian Cinema, which was about 15 or 14 years ago. And the books that have been published after that have been compilations of my interviews and my reviews and my earlier writing. So those aren't books I wrote. So it really stemmed out of that I wanted to get back to writing a book. But I've been a digital journalist now for about 8 years, and my attention span is a goldfish. It's the Dory from Finding Nemo, basically. So for me to commit to writing straight away a book of 50, 60,000 words was very intimidating. And so if I could break it down into specific chapters that are only one film. It felt more contained. It felt like something I could tackle. And of course, it eventually ended up being 50,000 words anyway, because it's 51 entries. But it felt like I could manage it.
Right. So, but I'm again still a bit curious about why. I mean, it could have been anything, right? It could have been writing about stars. It could have been specifically just movies. It's a brilliant mix of, you speak about a few people who are not necessarily actors, right? There's something about Karan Johar, there's about Diljit, who's actor, singer, everything. You have one about your experience in the theaters itself, like the darkened theaters, if I'm not wrong, that's the title of the chapter. So it's a brilliant, if slightly odd, collection of different things. So
it is odd. It is odd. It's idiosyncratic, isn't it? It's just like a sorry, I'm not letting you finish. Please go on.
No. My thought still remains the same. What was the core thought behind this book? I mean, of course, the
core thought. No, the core thought. Siddharth, was literally that people, places, events that have a place in my heart. Okay, so it was things, not things. Things is the wrong word, but it was aspects of cinema, whether it's artists, whether it's the movies, whether it's actual events that have kind of shaped my career, which is over 25 years, and which is why perhaps some people might think it's memoir-ish, but it's definitely not a memoir to begin with. I don't think my memoir would interest anyone. Like, who gives a shit, right? But for me, what's interesting is that I've seen, because I've worked for almost 3 decades now, I've seen so much change. I've seen so much evolve. And I think those stories are valuable. I don't think that my life story is necessarily valuable to anyone. But I think that the culture and the ways in the industry changed, the way movies changed, the way our perception of women in film changed, I think that is valuable and needed to be recorded.
Right. And just for the record, I think I'll disagree with you when you say your memoir won't be valuable to people. I think there are tons of people who would be wishing to read that perspective. I agree. One of the lines which I think you've used twice in the book, which actually stood out for me, was where you mentioned when in your early 90s you would go to the sets and it would just be you and the hairdresser and the actress's mom, and they were the only women on set. And fast forward to today, where like I know a lot of my female friends who actually work on sets, which just changes this entire perspective. But it's very interesting. You mentioned that you did a master's in literature, or a BA in literature
in journalism. A BA in literature
from Xavier's, right? And you have always had this itch to write. You've written a few books. Are you a voracious reader as well? Is that something that feels?
I used to be. So I was taught, Siddharth, I was privileged enough to be taught by Eunice D'Souza, who was a great poet, and she was sort of the kind of legend at St. Xavier's in the late 80s, and she was one of those professors who change your life. They instill in you a kind of a passion, a fire. I mean, I remember, and of course she didn't have to do this, but back then she was showing us sort of art house Russian cinema, because as literature students, it was important that we had a wider perspective. So I remember seeing Kozyntsev's King Lear. I mean, just stuff that you wouldn't imagine, right? And she was trying to get us to think in expansive ways, to see the world in expansive ways. And she was the first person who actually encouraged me to write. And she used to edit the books page at a newspaper called Indian Post. And I first wrote, my first published pieces were while I was still in college, because I reviewed books for the Indian Post. So basically, Siddharth, she instilled in me a great love for reading, and a great love for books, which actually waned when I had my kids. Parenting and reading are very difficult to combine, or at least they were for me. I was really, and again, just trying to balance. Though I did write the books, I wrote my Sholay book when my my son was born, because I thought that that would be a way to balance being a mom, and because I those were hours I controlled,
Right.
and but in the last, I would say, in the last about 2 years, I have made a very focused effort at getting back to reading.
Right.
So I'm my goal right now is 2 books a month, and I
Okay.
managed in January.
Okay.
But that's what I'm trying to keep to, that I because I
Right.
really, it's very important. I need to read more.
Right. So, it's, and I think that's a grouch most parents have. My parents have. My mother loved to read, and she had the same grouch that, when parenting happened, kind of took away her time to read in that sense.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But I'm quite curious about this in particular, because you inhabit a world where you're reviewing cinema, which is and you've started from a world where you reviewed books, and till a certain point of time you were reading a lot of books and were enamored by it. These are two way different forms of art, right? And they are so contrasting in terms of what they depict. Like, when with cinema you have this limited time and you have the visual medium to show people something, while books just let you do so much more, if not different. What has
Yeah.
been your experience in terms of these contrasting art forms interplaying with each other? Have you ever felt that, some of your movie reviews were kind of shaped by what you were reading at that point of time, or the other way around? Like, was your work kind of influencing what you were deriving from what you were reading? Because at the end of it, both
You
are
know,
art forms which are giving you something.
absolutely. No, look, the fact that I'm a literature student, I think shapes the way I write massively,
Uh-huh.
massively. My um, uh, the way I write, the way I try and communicate, is I think the foundation for it was definitely put down back in the day when I studied English literature.
Right.
And I think it 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 continues to kind of inform each other, because I have become a reader of mostly non-fiction and mostly movie books. So I'm constantly reading about cinema.
Right.
Like I just finished reading a book called Audienceology, which is
Hmm.
about audience testing in America,
Right.
and
Right.
how audience testing actually reshapes movies. And there were just incredible stories of very famous films being recut, or having parts endings being changed because the audience responded in a certain way. So
Right.
when I read stuff like that, it shapes my sense of the the industry, of the craft. So
Right.
it's really, it's constantly cross pollination.
Right. Right.
There's constant cross pollination. I don't think there's, because Siddharth, with a review, um, when you watch a film, you bring everything to it. It's
Hmm.
not that there's some compartment in your head where this is a
Right.
reviewing part of me and this is the book reading part of me. It's all of you.
Right. Right.
So everything that you put in is what you bring to a film.
Correct. No, and it's very interesting that you describe it in this particular manner, right? That you can't segregate these compartments
You
in your head
can't.
when you're
You can't.
experiencing art. And that's how it is, right? I mean, any kind of art form that you're enjoying, and what books stand out for you or what cinema stands out for you, just stems from who you become as a person over the years. But before I just move on to a little more questions about about books and writing in general, I have one question about the world of cinema for you, because this is something one of my friends who works in the industry has this grouch, and she shared it with me about how her work, even though enriching and fun for her, she's a huge buff of Hindi cinema in general. But she says, according to her, the technical knowledge of how things work, or her interaction with the industry, have sort of broken the magic of cinema. Something like if, I don't know if you're still able to. You mentioned how you watch your family watches K3G once a year, which I think is a tradition for a lot of families, including mine. But I mean, are you still able to enjoy that mall meeting scene after knowing how, like, it's taken 50 times, being on sets while interviewing people? I don't know. Has
Absolutely.
30 years kind of broken you, or I would be so
No,
glad if you
no,
pose me on this.
no, not at all. Not at all. And I think that's the magic of the movies.
Yeah.
And that's really the power of storytelling.
Yeah.
That no matter, and I'm married to a filmmaker, so I've seen every aspect of it. There's nothing
Right.
that is, there's nothing that I have some rose tinted glasses about.
Right. Right.
I've seen failure, I've seen massive success. Uh, we've seen it all.
Right.
But when I watch a movie,
Mhm.
it still moves me, it still inspires me, it still kind of because I don't drink, I don't smoke. My highs are movies, and I still get that completely. Knowing the process has never taken away the magic.
I'm so glad to hear that. I mean, I think that that's very reassuring for, I think, most people who are listening to this, that no, because that this directly translates into the writing process as well, right? I mean, for a lot of readers who are aspiring writers as well, I think this becomes in, like, would this kind of take away from the charm of reading books once you kind of go through an edit process or manuscript submission process, vagera. But the next thing that I wanted to ask you was, I mean, clearly this book is, there are movies and things that hold a place in your heart. But have there been books that kind of, I won't ask for your favorite books, obviously, that, I mean, I think that's just a cardinal sin. But I still do believe there are books that really impact people, right? I mean, over the
Yeah,
years, maybe like
yeah.
something you read in your teenage or in your college, or maybe like the two books that you're still reading this month might have been something that's impacting you or shaping you or what you're doing. So have there been some books which kind of supremely impacted you?
The one that really kind of stayed with me was, it's a book called The Power and the Glory by Graham Greene.
Okay.
And it's a story of a priest, um, and at one point he's in a jail and he's looking at all these people around him, and they're really sort of, you know sort of criminals, and they're just like it's the dregs of humanity, surrounding him. And yet he thinks to himself and says that, um, he understands that hate is a failure of imagination,
Right.
because if you imagine the other person's circumstance, you will understand what led him or her to behave a certain way, and you could never hate them.
Right.
And that line and that scene has, I read this, Eunice was the person who told me to read it, and I've never forgotten it. It's just the most brilliant idea. And I think perhaps one that we really need in the world today, which is so polarized and so filled with hate, that finally, if you just put yourself in the other person's shoes and if you imagine their circumstances, you can't hate.
Yeah, and that's actually very interesting because I recently spoke to an author who she's written a book about forgiveness. She'd lost her husband and her daughter in the 26/11 attacks. She's from America and they were
Wow.
visiting you. And she wrote a book about forgiveness and how it works. And it's broadly along the same lines which you just spoke about. And
Yeah.
yeah, and that, see, that's the power of books, I guess, right? I mean, this is, I think, a book you read what, way back in the 80s, and
Yeah, late
right.
80s, so more than
Right.
30 years ago.
Yeah, and look at you, you're still quoting like the lines from the
Yeah,
book as they verbatim, right? I
yeah,
mean, just
yeah,
because you read them and they impacted you. Uh,
yeah.
right. But so now I want to talk to Anupama, the writer, right? I mean, so because there are, in my experience, I've just met two kinds of writers, actually three, but we'll get to the third one later. There's one who's, the typical Ernest Hemingway kind, or write drunk, edit sober, let the words flow whenever you want to, which is, as art flows out of you, you let it out. And there's this other kind, which is a lot more disciplined, and you have, a fixed set of hours and a table where you sit and, a process that you follow. So which box would you put yourself under? Like, that when you're
First of
writing
all,
things out.
Siddharth, in no world am I in the same sort of hemisphere as Ernest Hemingway. I am not at all
You
an artist. So there is no art flowing
no.
out of me. I think of myself more as a worker.
Okay.
I'm a mazdoor. I love what I do,
Right.
but what I do is perhaps lead people to other people's art. I
Right.
would never ever uh, presume to call myself an artist. But in terms of just the process, my writing, it's that early morning, and
Mhm.
I'm very, I lost the ability to really write because I spent a long time, in like around 2014 is when my platform Film Companion was established, and the same year we took over the reins of the Mumbai Film Festival, the Geomami Mumbai Film Festival. So I spent about the first 3 or 4 years just putting these two entities into place, and I spent a lot of my energy went into being a producer and an enabler and a fundraiser and a sort of a cinema activist rather than a film critic. um, and um, and I really felt like about three years ago I had a massive existential crisis, and I was like, my god, I don't think I can write anymore, because it's you have to exercise the writing muscle every day if you can, and I'm not there yet. um, I try to write at least 3 to 4 times a week, sit down and put down 500 words. That's my happy place, is if I can get 500 words on the page. I remember I was at the Jaipur Literature Festival, talking to an author who wrote crime novels, and she was like, when I get to 15,000, then I feel like the day was worth it. And I was like, oh my god, I want to just tullu bhar pani mein doobna, So,
I can imagine.
yeah, but I try, and for me it is it has to be disciplined. It has to be sit down. I don't have a specific place as such, but it's me and my laptop, and I have to try and do 500 words.
Okay, so first of all, if I can just put your existential crisis to ease, if this helps at all, you are a very good writer. As someone who's read your like columns and this book as well, I can quite safe in that criteria. I mean, I agree with the exercising your writing muscle bit, but yeah. Just a slight disagreement on whether your work constitutes art or not, because like for me, the way I've been looking at it is, I mean, curate, and this goes beyond what you're doing, right? It goes to museum curators or curators of art in general, right? I think because that role is so very crucial, because particularly in today's world where there's just this plethora of cinema and art and like OTTs, regional cinema, and so much. Like reading this book, I absolutely love Hindi cinema, and some of the regional works that you've described are, I've just bookmarked them as, okay, these are things that I need to watch, because the way you've written about them have made me watch them. So I think in that sense, it's an art in itself, kind of being able to make someone agitated enough, if that's the correct word, to kind of rush towards a particular art form, right?
Thank you.
But so Anupama, like, I mean, you've clearly enjoy writing. Have you ever been, enamored by like going behind the cameras, or like, just writing a screenplay or dialogues, lyricist, and something? I mean, you've been working for 30 years. Never thought the thought crossed your head?
Never. It's just something that I have no talent for at all. I love to watch movies. I love to talk about movies. I love to champion movies. I want to stand on my little pulpit and say, watch this and please can I point you in that direction. But do I want to make movies? No, somehow that has just never interested me. The truth is, I of course I don't have the talent, but I also perhaps don't have the courage. It takes a lot of courage to just create work and put it out there for the public to consume, and to not know, and to never know, is it going to work, is it not going to work, are they going to reject it? And being, like I said, being married to a filmmaker, I've seen what rejection is like, and it's brutal. It's not pretty at all, because it's public, it's immediate, it's on the same Friday, and you've just spent 2 years making that film, right? So I think it takes a real spine of steel to be an artist, and I don't have it.
Okay. So, and this is not ever also been about being on screen also, is it? Like never that urge, or I don't know, instinct to act?
No, I trained, Siddharth, as a print journalist. which
Okay.
is why I spent the first, my major in Northwestern was actually magazine journalism, and
Mhm.
I spent about 12 years working with India Today magazine.
Right.
So the on camera only happened because Dr. Pranoy Roy and Radhika Roy
Came
summoned me to Delhi and said,
yeah,
"Do you want to do a show
to
for
the show.
NDTV?" And I was like, I was like, I don't think I could be on camera. I don't know how to be on camera. And they said, no, we'll
Right.
train you. And
Mhm.
that's what they did. They just trained me into it.
Right. Okay. So it was only just like a part of your formal training, never like heading towards the acting side of things, or never
Oh,
a
no,
natural
no,
thing
never.
coming to
Acting, though, not at
you.
all. Never. I would never dare.
Yeah, but yeah, I'm very curious because clearly your work's already somewhat maybe not in the same way as you described cinema, right? I mean, being tested on Fridays, obviously that requires that steel, spine of
Yeah,
steel that
yeah.
you described. But in a way, your work's already somewhat tested by the public, right? I mean, even
Yes.
right. So it I think has to somewhat go beyond that. Like, so because my next thing that I was going to ask you was about fiction books. Is that something that you've considered ever? Because clearly
No.
you're a good writer. I mean, that's something that I can attest to. So and obviously it's not everyone's cup of tea to write both fiction and non-fiction. I mean, it and doesn't
Yeah,
necessarily
yeah.
always mean that if you're good at one, you'll be great at the other. But again, has
Sure.
that ever been something you've thought of?
Somehow not at all. I think also perhaps because the shadow of my brother Vikram Chandra looms so large. How could I
Yeah.
possibly write fiction
That,
when he's there?
yeah, well, I mean, that is a tall order. I mean, that is something
Yes,
difficult to surpass, I guess. But
exactly.
Anupma, that brings us to the end of this interview, and I have just one question before we end this. What's next in terms of the writing department that's coming from you? What next can we expect?
I really enjoyed the process of writing this book, and I think it really stretched me as a writer.
Mm,
I think it kind of it was challenging. It didn't come easily. Writing is never easy. I sit in front of that blank computer screen and just get the heebie-jeebies, and so I want to continue it, but I want to find something that I can love enough for a year
mhm.
to stay with it.
Right,
Which a place in my heart was actually, it made it easy because I got to fall in love and talk about 51 things, right?
right,
So you didn't have to be in love with one thing for the whole year. You could
right,
just write one movie and then go on to Diljit
right,
Dosanjh and then write about Aditya Chopra
right,
and then something else. uh, so for the next thing, when I worked on the Shah Rukh book, for me it was such a fascinating story of not just Shah Rukh Khan, but what the rise of Shah Rukh Khan said about Hindi cinema at that time, what it
right,
said about the change in our cultural consciousness at that time.
right.
Why was Shah Rukh the perfect hero for
Mhm.
us to have at that time? So it became a sort of wider exploration. So I have to find the next subject that will kind of really seduce me, and then I can just go at it.
Right. Here's hoping you find it soon, and then we see
Me too.
more of these works coming from your end. And this was fabulous, Anupma. Thank you so much for doing this and joining us today. This was absolutely lovely
Thank
talking to
you.
you. Thank you.
Thank you, Siddharth, and good luck with your show. All best, and wishing you many good books in your life.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Perfect. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. If you enjoyed this podcast, please check us out on all our social media platforms. We're available across all podcasting platforms on YouTube, on Instagram. You can find us at the rate Kitabi Karwan on Instagram, or just search Kitabi Karwan on Google or a platform of your choice and you'll find us. We carry out Instagram lives, giveaways, we talk about books, we talk to bibliophiles, talk to authors, and basically try and create a reader's world through all of our platforms. Do check us out and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.